Hello, my friends, and welcome to Mrs. Saunders' Reading Corner. Today's story I'm going to read to you is from a book I purchased from Scholastic Canada. It's called Riveting Read-Alouds for Middle School, and it's intended for grade 5 and up, but I think grade 4 would be okay to listen to it as well. So come along and get cozy. Get a pillow, a blanket, and get comfortable and join me for this story. The story is called The Golden Arm, and it's by J.B. Stamper. Once there was a woman who had a golden arm. She had lost her real arm in a terrible accident, but after she got the golden arm, she didn't even seem to miss her real one. The golden arm was beautifully made. It was slender and elegant and shone with a warm glow from its shoulder right down to the fingertips. The woman vainly decorated its golden fingers with jewels. People who saw her thought she must be very rich to have such a lovely golden arm. But in fact, the opposite was true. The woman's husband made only enough money for them to get modestly by in life. For many years he had carefully saved part of his paycheck. This money had added up to a considerable sum. But after her accident, the wife demanded that he spend it all on the golden arm and the decorations. Being a meek person, he did as she asked. But deep inside, he hated that arm. Every morning at the breakfast table, the man would stare at the golden arm lying on the table across from him. He would think of all the scrimping and saving he had done over the years. He would think of all the comforts the money could have bought him. Now it all rested in his wife's golden arm. He grew to hate its shapely curves and shiny golden fingers. As the years passed, the woman seemed to grow more and more fond of the arm. More fond of the arm and less fond of her husband. She insisted on a new ring every birthday. Her husband, afraid of her terrible temper and biting tongue, scrimped and saved again to meet her demands. But with each passing year, his resentment against the arm grew and grew. One cold winter evening, as the couple was reading the newspaper, the wife read a notice about the death of a woman she had gone to school with. She dropped the paper suddenly and stared blankly at the wall, her face drained of all color. The idea of death had crept into her mind, and it just would not go away. The more the woman thought about dying, the more she found herself stroking the golden arm with her other hand. Slowly, an idea began to take form in her mind. An idea she had never considered before. She turned to her husband and met his eyes with a steely glaze. "If I happen to die before you," she said to him, "promise me to bury me with my golden arm." Her husband clutched the newspaper so tightly that it ripped, and he stared at his wife in shocked amazement. "But that arm is the only thing of value that we have," he said, his voice shaking. "All the money I've worked for and saved has gone into it. I want it to be buried with me," his wife said in an insistent voice. "And I want all my rings and all my fingers." She paused, picturing in her mind how she would look in her casket. "Just think how people will stare when they view my body." Well, at that very moment, the husband's heart turned as hard and cold as the golden arm. Any feelings of love that remained for his wife were turned to bitter disgust. But still, he was afraid of her, and he did not want to cross her. Calmly, he looked her in the eye and promised to do as she had asked. After all, he told himself, there was little chance that she would die before he did. The future, however, proved them wrong, and just 1 year later, his wife died suddenly of a mysterious illness. In shock, the man went about the preparations for her funeral. He planned to tell the undertaker to remove the golden arm before laying his wife out in the casket. But then his wife's relatives arrived to help make the funeral arrangements. To his dismay, she had told him about her desire to be buried with the golden arm. She had even given them a signed legal document stating her wishes, and so, even in her death, his wife got her way. At the funeral, the man stared at the body laid out in the casket, with the golden arm gleaming at its side. On the golden fingers sparkled all the jeweled rings, and as the coffin lid was closed for the final time, the man said goodbye, not only to his wife, but also to his life savings. After the funeral, the man's mind settled into a heavy gloom that just would not lift. Day after day he thought of his wife's coffin and the golden arm gleaming inside. Why, he asked himself, should she still have that arm when he could sell the gold and live out the rest of his life without worry? Slowly the man's meekness turned to anger and revenge. Then, on one cold and windy night near the end of October, while the man lay in bed, an idea began to prey on his mind. What if the arm was no longer in the coffin? What if someone had already stolen it? After all, who would be so foolish as to let that much gold stay buried? The idea took root in the man's mind and grew like a poisonous weed. Finally, not able to stand it any longer, the man jumped from his bed and pulled on his warmest clothes. He went to the garage and found a pick and a shovel, and then he hurried toward the graveyard in which his wife was buried under the hard, cold ground. Breathing heavily with anticipation and fear, the man came up to the high iron gate of the graveyard. He hesitated and then pushed against them. The gate swung open like the jaws of a gigantic black mouth. Only the thought of the golden arm made the man force his legs forward, step by step, towards his wife's grave. His mind was still obsessed by the picture of the grave, dug up and disturbed. But when he reached the burial site, the grave lay untouched under the full moon, covered by bouquets of wilting flowers. In a mad frenzy, the man began to work. He dug the pickaxe into the hard earth and then shoveled it away, digging deeper and deeper. At last, the pick struck the top of his wife's expensive coffin. An image of the golden arm began to burn into the man's mind. It gave him enough courage to pull open the coffin lid and look down at his wife's decaying body. In triumph, he pulled the golden arm from the grave and cradled it against his chest. Quickly, the man shut the coffin back up and covered it again with the cold earth. The night turned bitterly cold. Rain began to lash down on the man's head as he ran back to his house. He hugged the golden arm tighter and tighter under his coat. But the icy embrace sent a shudder through his whole body. At last the man reached his home feeling sick with fear. He searched and searched for a place to hide the arm, but nowhere seemed safe. Finally, in desperation, he slipped it under the blankets of his bed and crawled in beside it. Outside, the wind howled around the house and the rain tapped like angry fingers against the window panes. The man huddled in his bed and tried to calm his shaking body. He pulled the covers up higher around his face, but beside him the golden arm was still icy cold. It seemed to draw all the heat out of his body, making him feel like a corpse in a coffin. When sleep refused to come, the man tried to busy his mind, thinking of all the things he would buy after selling the golden arm. But his mind was pulled away from these thoughts by a soft, strange wail that seemed to come and go with the howling of the wind. The man sat up in bed and strained his ears. Then he heard the sound again, just outside his bedroom window. Hoo-hoo! Who's got my golden arm? The wailing voice made the man's blood run cold. It sounded like his wife's voice, mixed with the howling of the wind. He looked over to where the golden arm lay beside him in bed, and he shrank away from it. Again, the man thought he heard the strange voice calling from outside the window. He strained his ears to hear, but the sound faded away into the night with the wind. Slowly the man relaxed and smiled at his own stupidity. He told himself that he had let his imagination go wild. But then the wailing started again, like a ghostly call from the grave. Who's got my golden arm? In panic, the man searched the darkness. The voice sounded closer now. It seemed to be coming from inside the house. All the man could think about was hiding the golden arm. He couldn't be discovered with him beside him, in bed. Reaching under the covers, the man tried to pick up the arm, but it was so cold that it almost froze his fingers. He dropped it and stared at it in terror. In the pale moonlight, he saw one gold finger pointing at him in accusation. Then again the wailing voice echoed into the room. Who's got my golden arm? Now the voice was coming from the staircase. Then the man heard the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs, one by one, as the wailing voice came closer and closer to his bedroom door. Who's got my golden arm? With a sickening creak, the door to the bedroom opened. The man lay trembling under the covers, trying to hide from the thing that was coming nearer and nearer to his bed. His teeth began to chatter with fear, and he suddenly felt the icy cold fingers of the golden arm stab at him. Now the footsteps had reached the bed. The arm's cold grip was reaching up around the man's neck. Then softly the voice beside his bed whispered into his ear. Who's got my golden arm? With a scream, the man tried to jump from the bed, but he couldn't because the fingers of the golden arm had tightened around his neck. The next day, the neighbors found the man, dead from fright. He was buried a few days later in a cemetery, beside his wife and her golden arm. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed reading it. So, if you would like to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the events that happened in the story, I have inserted some questions for discussion that you can discuss with someone else in your house, or you can take a little bit of time to write them down and get some adult to read them over. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.